churches that have come, and they are in agreement that all of them will come forward to present. It'll be in the order of what's on the paper, and everyone will have 5 minutes, and then I thought it would be better that we then take questions to the panel, and there can be 5 answers or 6 answers depending on the numbers of people, or there could be 1 or 2 answers because that satisfies, but just for the expediency of trying to keep the meeting moving. So I'm going to ask Diane Robinson from Araki Baptist Church, please, and she will speak first, and then we'll have John Roberts come up. From the Elam Church. We then have the Right Reverend Ross Bay, the Bishop of Auckland for the Anglican Diocese, and we have Reverend Pauline Stewart from St Heliers Presbyterian Church. Pauline, yes, sorry. And then we have Jeff Foster representing the Presbyterian churches in the Auckland region. And I am aware that there are representatives of other churches, including the Catholic Church at the back, who don't wish to speak, but may get some support passed on from the Anglican Church. So welcome everyone.
Sorry, I'm from the Rationalists. I realise.
Yeah, yep. And then we're going to have all the questions from of the church-based faiths, and then we're going to have the Rationalist and Humanist Society, which is Peter. Is it Peter Robinson? You will be presenting after that.
What's the deal?
Right. We are going to start with welcome, Pauline. Diane, yes, please.
Am I on?
Yep, you're on.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. And I particularly want to thank Councillor Desley Simpson. I raised this matter at a public meeting, and I could tell by the look on her face that she had no idea what I was talking about. So I thank you for listening and for following up. And that kind of makes me wonder how many of you really knew what was going on. So I want to talk about that from the point of view of a volunteer treasurer, volunteer administrator, representing hundreds of churches from Rodney to Franklin and thousands of people who worship in churches. And why do we go to these churches? Because church buildings are places of hope. They are places of hope. So I just want to go through this incredibly badly flawed process. In early November 2016, hundreds of churches got this survey out of the blue, in the mail, badly worded, very ambiguous. We weren't sure how to fill it in. And what you should have done, and what you must do going forward, if you want to deal with churches, talk to the Interchurch Bureau of the main denominations. They could have pre-warned all the volunteers like me, helped you get the wording right, got rid of the ambiguity. Consultation. But you didn't consult. And we did our best. You gave us 10 days to fill in that survey, and you took a year, December 2017, to send out a letter saying, thanks for sending it in. And when I got that letter, I thought, well, this is just going to go on forever and a day. We'll hear no more. Stop worrying. Then in May this year, we get the letter, and you say, right, Araki Baptist Church, 3% of your CV for offices. I've already told you that our offices are empty. We don't have any employees. 27% for our hall. We had a hall in the old church, but that burnt down 20 years ago. We don't have a hall. You haven't been to visit. And you've done this to us and loads of other churches across Auckland. I know one church that filled in their survey completely honestly, told you they have a building that's offices that are rented out, and you still rated them at 0. What did you do with the surveys? Did you chuck them away? No transparency, no consultation. May this year we get the letter with the 30%. But it doesn't tell us how much rates we're going to have to pay from the beginning of July. It doesn't tell me how much extra money I have to find for the budget. I put in the objection. Took 15 days to get the email back that said, oh, sorry for the delay, we've had high volumes of emails. Well, I wonder why, because you didn't consult. Beginning of August, we finally get the rates bill, and I've got to find $1,400 by the end of the month. $5,700 for the year. What do? Shall I shut down our free after-school drop-in for the local kids from the marae? Shall I cancel our free English as a second language classes? Where do I find this money from? You haven't given us warning. We got that letter that offered us the mitigation, and thank you for that. But it arrived in the post box on the 29th of August, only 2 days before the first instalment was due. And even then, we had to apply to you to get it mitigated. The law says buildings used primarily for religious purposes are non-rateable. These rates notices that you sent out are wrong. And while it's a nice idea to give us a grant and apply that against a rates instalment, the fact is the rates instalments are wrong. I want, going forward, please, when you want to deal with the churches, we've got the Interchurch Bureau that involves most of the main church denominations. Quickly get emails sent out. Don't make me have to go and check our post office box every day in case snail mail has delivered another thing from Auckland Council. And please remember that if you say to us, we're going to rate you on the bits that aren't religious, then I'm going to have to say to the community groups, well, council doesn't think you're religious, go somewhere else. Please, going forward, consult properly, be transparent, and think about the outcome of your decisions. Because if churches end up having to pay thousands of dollars of rates and end up having to close down, you're going to have to find the money to build the new community halls. Thank you.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you, Diane. John, representing the Elim Churches of New Zealand.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is John Roberts. I'm a self-employed chartered accountant and serve as an elder and a trustee for the Elim Church in Auckland. We have 8 congregations, 3 integrated school campuses, a kindergarten and a ministry training college. I'm also speaking on behalf of Chris Bethwaite, who is the chairperson of the Interchurch Bureau that's been referred to, which is a national body whose members comprise the majority of Protestant churches in New Zealand and also works in with the Catholic Church. Chris has surgery yesterday, so can't be here today. The local congregation that I attend is the Elim Church in Cook Street in the city. We responded to council's survey when it came out and advised that our property was 100% used for church purposes. A few months ago, we received our annual rates assessment, which had increased from the $400 rubbish collection charge to $21,000. That caused a bit of a shock. No explanation, no valuer had been to visit, no consultation, just a new policy and a massive bill. Thankfully, as a result of assistance from members of this committee and others, a valuer was fairly quickly dispatched to check the church property, resulting in the rates being reassessed back down to the $400 rubbish charge. However, it's left us with a severely shaken trust in council's systems and a high level of suspicion about what council's real intentions are. It's important to point out that in 2007, the Local Government Rates Inquiry sought to have Parliament change the Rating Act such that local councils would be able to make their own decisions about the rating of churches and other organisations that receive exemptions under the Act. That inquiry recommended to Parliament that most rating exemptions be removed from the legislation. Parliament rejected that recommendation. It's not appropriate for councils to now try and reinterpret the meaning of the legislation and the exemption, which for the most part has been consistently applied for 150 years. That is, that church properties are exempt from rates. The report from, we've been consistently told that this is not a change in council's rating policy, but a tidy up of inconsistencies inherited from legacy councils. I've been involved in Elim's finances in Auckland for over 30 years, and Auckland City never applied the Rating Act in this way. This is a clear attempt to chip away at the rating exemption given to churches by Parliament. The report from council officers that you'll look at today correctly notes that rates must comply with legislation. While the officer's recommendations do now reflect the legislation in some respects, we still have concerns about a number of interpretations and conclusions that, in our opinion, are at variance with the legislation and the manner in which it has been interpreted since the exemption first came into place in 1876. But let me just say that as churches, we don't want to be here arguing with council. We want to work with council. We're not looking for an exemption where property is principally used for a business activity, but the Rating Act provides churches with an exemption for a place of religious worship. And a modern place of religious worship requires a multifaceted property. We want the opportunity for a proper, open and thorough consultation on the application of the Rating Act as it applies to places of religious worship. It's our view that the Auckland Council has not engaged in an open process of consultation as it's required to do, and that it has effectively attempted to reinterpret legislation that has remained unchanged for 150 years. This is really important to us, so we're keen to cooperate with Council in a timely manner to undertake a proper consultation on the matter. While this matter represents a minute portion of Council's total revenue, it's serious stuff for us. I would therefore respectfully request that when you come to consider the officer's report on this matter a little later, that you amend the recommendation to simply require officers to undertake a proper consultation with churches and report back to this committee. From those in attendance at this meeting today and working with the Interchurch Bureau that's been referred to, we can provide you with a small group of 3 or 4 suitably skilled people to be involved in that consultation and to assist officers and elected representatives to arrive at an appropriate outcome. Thank you.
Right, we will now ask the Right Reverend Ross Bay, Bishop of Auckland, representing the Anglican Diocese. Welcome.
Councillor Clomere, Phil and members of Council, thank you. Like my colleagues, we're very grateful for the opportunity to address you today. I speak on behalf of the 68 Anglican parishes that are within the Auckland Council's jurisdiction, but Bishop Patrick Dunn of the Catholic Church is unable to be here, asks me to speak on his behalf. He's represented here today by Monsignor Paul Farmer, and also the Methodist Church represented by Julie Adamson in the public gallery wish to tōtoku the things that I have to say. We have been taken somewhat by surprise by the actions and recommendations of council officers which have seen rates applied to churches increase by many thousands of dollars, effectively overnight in some cases. Council officers have explained the lack of consultation that we've experienced as being about no change, but more consistently applying the existing law. And so, therefore, no change, no need for consultation. We, in fact, dispute what, in my mind, is a new interpretation of the provisions of the Local Government Rating Act. It's an established understanding through its application and practice over more decades than any of us have been alive. But furthermore, the impact of it is at least to hamper the Church's ability to contribute to the health and the well-being of our local community and the people in it. At worst, it can in fact, in some cases, threaten the continued existence of the local church at all. And so I would argue that that in fact is a significant change that in fact demanded much wider consultation. Again, I'm grateful for the Council's action in deferring rate payments until this committee has had a chance to consider it, and I'm also grateful for some of the revised thinking that's present in the report from the Council officers that you'll consider today. We do recognise the provisions that are present in the Act that gives the churches some relief on rates. In my submission, I want to particularly address what we understand to be the meaning of religious worship and education. I'm going to be almost philosophical, perhaps even theological in some of the things that I've got to say, but I guess that is my particular expertise. For us to see the use of our buildings as being only for what you might consider the religious ritual of what goes on a Sunday morning would be an irresponsible use of the significant resource that's represented by church buildings that have been provided by generations of people through the years within local communities. Furthermore, I believe it's a misunderstanding of what Christian faith is actually about, what worship and education means in practice. Our places of worship and their related buildings were certainly built for the benefit of the people of the church community, but also with the intention that they would benefit the people of the community as a whole. Our faith teaches us that the reality of Christian worship, that's the honour of God, is seen in the way in which we honour other people and the way in which we serve them. The Anglican Church is founded on the parish system, and that is the commitment to being present in local communities and contributing to the well-being of that community by serving its needs and seeking the common good of its peoples. So the church isn't a private religious club. Rather, to quote a former Archbishop of Canterbury, William Temple, it's an organisation that exists for the benefit of those who are not its members. The buildings of the church are therefore used both for activities that are clearly religiously ritual or educative, being explicitly about Christian faith, and as places for the wider community to gather and to build its life as a whole. The chess club, the local tramping club, the AA group, or the other myriad of anonymous groups that there are today that seek to address problems of addiction. You could go on with a barely exhaustive list of groups that are found in church buildings, as Diane has already mentioned about Orake. Even though these groups would make a donation or pay a small fee to contribute to the costs of running the buildings, to maintain them, it's hard to see those as commercial arrangements that exist for profit. They are an expression of the church's commitment to its life of worship through seeking the common good of the community as a whole. So that principle has application not only to those church halls and the church buildings themselves, but to the car parks and office spaces, in particular in relation to offices. I mean, they nearly always house simply the clergy and parish staff who are helping keep the place going. You know, they're not leased out to other groups as a way of gaining some commercial income. We do not believe that their role can be separated from the role of the church site as a whole. Let me be clear, however, that where church property is being used solely for commercial purposes, so buildings or land that is leased out to third parties and used explicitly by them, from which the church is earning a commercial income, we believe that the appropriate rating, of course, should be applied to those properties. But I think you would find that they're going to be the rare exceptions that need seeking out, rather than the general principle that we then have to kind of resolve from in relation to 90-something% of our properties. Our church authorities would be very happy to work with council on those exceptions and to determine where rates should be appropriately applied in those cases. I thank you again for the opportunity to address you this morning, and if there's an official happy to take it, I'll leave a written copy of my submission.
Thank you, Ross. Right, Reverend Pauline Stewart from St Heliers Presbyterian, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you, councillors, for your time. I am a minister of the Presbyterian Church, but I will not be speaking on behalf of the Presbyterian Church. My colleague Jeff Foster on my left will do that. I want to speak on behalf of community centres, which are related to churches and are made possible by churches. But before I do that, there is one point which I'm pleased to see in the recommendations, which includes residential housing for ministers who live adjacent to the church, right next door. And there's not very many of them, very few in fact. But they stand as a sign that some people believe that their private life, as well as their professional life, is accessible to community service. And those places serve as emergency housing, meeting rooms, places where young people can gather and sit, as well as a home. So I believe the council is making a very good consideration if that can be included. How long they will last, I don't know. But while they're there, they provide a very valuable service by families who choose to be vulnerable and to offer themselves to the community at all hours of the night and day. And I'm not sure too many of us do that. So I'll conclude that part of the church's life. There are 38 Auckland community centres listed in the phone book. St Heliers is actually one of them. I don't know why Glendowie is not, so that would make it 39. And they're all non-rateable. So to receive a letter that says we will be rated in every area of our life after a 20-year partnership with the Auckland Council was a bit of a shock to us. And when I rang to ask, was this a mistake? No, it certainly wasn't a mistake. And then as I proceeded with my conversation to explore, I could see the person did not know we even had a partnership with the Auckland Council. They did not know we had a preschool. They did not understand that we had a number of halls and that we had spent $4.25 million to build that, and that $1.25 million had come from the Auckland Council with a 20-year consideration. There was no knowledge of anything. So it does not give, it seemed to me, look, I cannot have another conversation with you until you do your homework. And we are voters. And as individuals, we pay rates. We deserve better, and you are capable of doing better than that. So I want to I'll finish at that point. Now, about churches that decide to spend a lot of money on community services and then to call themselves a community centre. It's no picnic. We are grateful for the operational funding we get from Auckland Council. It's minute. It doesn't pay one person's salary. At St Heliers Centre, we employ 35 people. Where do you think we get that money from? From businesses? From donations, from people who say, we will serve our community and we won't count the cost and we won't have any strings attached. That's a very difficult place to come to, and not many of us get there because we have to keep balancing the tension. But when a Christian community says, we will not try to make other people Christians, we don't care who comes in here, people of every faith, no faith, anybody, Muslims, Sikhs, they're all welcome, and we will not try and convert you. We will give you shelter. We will help you find your place as citizens in this country. Now, we do that because we feel compelled to serve. Now, that comes from the engine that drives these places, and that is worship. And if you start trying to separate that and call it little names and say that office can't be used because that's not worship, you are dividing what is a very basic tenet of community life. That engine is really important to this community. It's important to New Zealand. It's important to young people of all ages and people of no faith and every faith. So I want to say to you, this is not about just religion. It's about the basic rights of people and giving people an opportunity to serve their community as volunteers. So that's my message today, and I'm very grateful that you've given us the time. Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you, Pauline. Right, we will have Jeff. Welcome, Jeff.
Mr Chair, Mayor Goff, councillors. Thanks for the opportunity again. You've seen a very common theme coming through the 5 speakers here, and some of mine will be a little bit repetitive, but I'm going to cut a little bit out as well. This is issue is of a major concern to the religious organisations that we represent. So as I said, my name's Jeff Foster, I'm part of the Presbyterian Church, and today I'm representing the Northern Presbytery, which through the National Church has a governance oversight role over 70 plus churches in the Auckland boundary area. While our churches are all legally owned by our church property trustees, each church in the community is responsible for the functional use of their buildings and the operating costs of them, whether it be repairs, rates, insurance, water, sewage, etc. So any increase through this process, while small for council, is likely to have a significant impact on our churches and the mission that they represent in those ones. I do want to acknowledge the officer's report in the agenda, which I think gives considerable clarity that we've been looking for on many of the issues and has caused a huge amount of angst in our churches and many other religious organisations. The detailed analysis presented in the report and recommendations, I think would have been great to have been received a little bit earlier, especially before council struck its rates, and would have enabled some better communication that you've already heard about. I know at that stage you would have been battling with a long-term plan and some other fairly meaty subjects. You have much detail on the subject in written form from this church and others, largely through the letters and the objections through the RID, the Radio Information Database objection process, which we have had an interim response after some considerable time, but now we're now getting the full response to that. My comments are largely around paras 4 and 5 of the report in front of you of the executive summary. The principles of our non-rateability is clearly set out in the legislation, the LGRA, Schedule 1 and parts, Part 1, 9A, B and 6 in particular. The wording, land used solely or principally as a place of worship, is absolutely fundamental, and you've heard a number of expanding that legislation theme today. It's been in place for a long, long time. The legislation hasn't changed. Churches have, and I use the term church here in the context of what where we term Presbyterian properties, but recognise that other names could be used for other religious organisations, whether it be temples, mosques, Christian centres or whatever. It's no secret either that church membership for us and others has dropped over the last decade or so. So Presbyterian churches now are required to carry out a strategic planning exercise, a rolling 5-year one, called a mission plan. And that mission plan obviously addresses the spiritual needs of the church, but it also sets out strategies to understand the likely very diverse communities it sits in and how it will interact and integrate with those communities. And you've seen, again, a number of examples on just many, many different types of groups there. So this is very different to the church that was traditionally the Sunday worship session. It's part of the community. While some might argue that it's a survival strategy, we believe this is the reality of church today for both healthy and viable churches and indeed healthy communities that we live and serve with. Please don't try to just put percentages of rateable and non-rateable use for these missional activities. It's church. Surely any definition, principle used in this legislation would cover that. Now, a few brief comments on the administrative guidelines in the report. We welcome these. Some of the changes made from what were previously non-rateable properties were absolutely baffling to us, and as an administrative interpretation change, we believe were quite deficient. And again, you've heard those, especially in the consultation and impact areas. So I don't need to expand further on those at this stage. I think the recommendations of the report go some way towards rectifying those, and we don't want to go down a legal track. I know you'll have a legal opinion that you can do these things. I'm sure, could get a counter opinion to say, well, that's not quite right, and it's not, I don't think, helping anyone to solve what we're trying to solve here. The Presbyterian Church has never had a problem with church property being rated if the use is commercial or residential in most cases. We would like to see more definition around what is regarded in these guidelines, especially for the commercial areas. How is the area to be defined? Is it capable of apportionment, separate apportionment? Can it be clearly valued properly? Is it leased for a period of time? Just some of those other examples. And the last probably point that we have a real problem is the offices, as you've already heard. The small, large office differentiation, very problematical. The determining factor, we believe, should be the underlying rateability of the property, which surely the office is probably there to serve. Should the whole property be deemed non-rateable at the moment? Is there any logic saying that that office should be rateable in any form? We struggle to see it. Again, we would be happy to work further to clarify issues with Council, and we again thank you and look forward to some positive change. Thank you.
Right, thank you all. I should also recognise Tony Poole from the Anglican Parish of St Thomas, who's behind there, who also requested to speak, but I'm afraid it was getting a bit tight, so I had to decline that with regards to numbers. And we had the Bharatiya Manda Indian Temple were going to present, and they withdrew after we had some discussions, and they realised their rates were not actually significantly affected. Firstly, I just really want to, on behalf of the Council and the staff, we certainly did not set out to upset anyone. We are 8 years into the Super City, and we're getting down to trying to fix up some of the last legacy issues where we have variation of rating across the city. We've done this when it comes to playing fields and that, because there's different scenarios, and I could name a whole number of things, but we're kind of working our way through things to try and get fairness and equity so that we've got the same set of rules across the Super City. So please accept our apologies. We do believe we could have handled it a little bit better with the communication. We're more than aware of that.
I'd like to move a vote of thanks.
So, no, we're going to, not yet, we're going to ask for questions. So I'm going to ask the first question. I really want to ask Diane, John and Pauline, because I've heard from Ross and Jeff, and Ross also speaking for the Catholic Church and the Methodists, that you have no issues with commerciality where commerciality is, because I'm going to ask that because in this exercise we actually flushed out one entity that should have been paying $200,000 worth of rates for car parks for 8 years. I'm just pointing out that's a lot of money. So we're flushing various things out that have come out that we didn't know about, and it's only this exercise has actually flushed that out. So I'm just asking those three, Diane, John and Jeff, do you share the same sentiment where there's clear commerciality, etc., that should be rates?
I always hesitate to offer an opinion without all the facts, but if it was clearly for commercial purpose, then sure. When you talk about car parks, I'd want to know some more facts, because when we build a church, the council insists that we provide X number of car parks, so we don't actually have a choice about how many car parks we provide. Sorry,
I should clarify that that's car parks where they've been charging people for day use as a commercial operation. So yeah, it's not car parks that are provided for religious worship. So, thank you. So, John, are you?
Yeah, similarly, if the commercial use is completely separate and exclusive from the church use, again, car parks is an interesting one, because if the car parks are also used for church use on a Sunday, then I would want to question that, because, for instance, we have a church in the back blocks of Manurewa that has a couple of hundred car parks, which are only there to service the church. We also have a church in the middle of Auckland City that has about 30 car parks that are only there to service the church. In Auckland City, there are people who want to use those during the week, and why shouldn't they, and why shouldn't they pay for it? In Manurewa, nobody wants a car park in the middle of the week. So what's the difference? The car parks are still principally there to service the work of the church. You made us put them there.
Yep. No, if you refer to the report under car parks, it says car parks only serving the religious worship land will be considered part of non-rateable activity. There is no issue there. It's just the commerciality of things. And Pauline?
The principle of subcontracting, I think, is rateable. You know, that's probably a basic tenet of our society.
Councillor Newman.
Thank you very much for your reflections, very refreshing. Two questions from me. Firstly, in relation to the broader approach to religious missions. So the premise here is that the property portfolio needs to be considered in terms of its contribution to and enabling the religious mission of the churches, which is more than obviously the worship on the Sabbath, and that it contributes to a wider gamut of activities, not for profit, in a line which is reflecting the outreach. Would that be a fair summation?
I think it's an insufficient summation. I think it should be religious and connected community, because there are many activities we are inspired to do that do not fit religious, but they are inspired by the fact that we believe that that is out to show mercy and to work for justice. And so I would not be just happy with that word religious. It's too open.
Okay. So therefore,
Yeah,
for example...
I think Ross's explanation was probably one of the better ones here.
I mean, if I can just comment, it's hard to know what was in the minds of the drafters of the Act all those years ago, and we're in a very different societal context when it was drafted. But you know, I would imagine that there was a broader sense of what that sort of religious activity was that was described in the Act as, you know, religious worship and religious education and so on. I think it probably reflected the activity of the church in that day, and we're saying the activity of the church is broader and has a wider benefit today, but it would still fit within, I believe, what was intended.
Okay, and my final question, I suppose, goes to you, John. So just picking up on the car park issue that you referred to. So no debate from me in relation to rating car parks where commercial terms apply and the car park exists exclusively for commercial use. But where the car park serves multiple land use, but for which the primary purpose is the accommodation of religious worship, we should be treating that as a non-rateable activity.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chief, I'll just make one comment on that. I think, again, it's the facts of the situation. If the car park is used Sunday for church, but the rest of the week there's a contract through an external commercial organisation of car parking, it is clearly rateable for certainly 6/7 of it, or some proportion at least. But I don't think we've got any argument with that at all.
Okay.
Can I just make one
Please,
comment
anyone
about car
answer?
parks? So, I think people... My old church, our car park is used by shoppers all the time, because people have got this idea that churches are only happening on Sunday mornings. But bear in mind, when it comes to church car parks are being used by whatever groups are meeting during the week. Sometimes it's in the evening, sometimes it's during the day, play group, whatsoever. Just bear that one in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yep, I think
Well,
everyone's
can I just say, in regard to our situation in the city, although we could lease out the car parks, we don't do that. because we've got so many activities happening during the week, we have an arrangement with the plumbing supply firm next door where we let them use our car parks because they let us use theirs on a Sunday to keep people off the street. Because on another matter, you're about to take car parks away from our street, which is going to cause mayhem on a Sunday because all of the people that are parking there are the people who live in the apartments around about.
Thank you.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chair, for extending so much time on this item with the church leaders. I think it's been very helpful and helpful for our deliberations. The focus has been mainly on the general rates, and I just wondered if I might offer the opportunity to comment on clause 9 in the report, which talks about land. It says land considered non-rateable is still liable for waste management targeted rates where a waste management service is provided. We hadn't touched on that in any of your feedback. I just wondered if there was any comment, if people agreed or disagreed or otherwise with that intent.
Well, for my church, I've already paid the normal rubbish collection amount we would normally pay.
We wouldn't have any problem.
We always have.
We don't have any problem.
Same with us.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions of our presenters?
Very reasonable.
Very good. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you all for your submissions today. If Council, before embarking on the process that you have discussed with some degree of criticism, if we had gone into consultation with you prior to that occurring, would your messages today have differed from what you have advised us today? Would there have been other matters that you would have raised?
I think if you had consulted with us, genuinely consulted, we wouldn't have to be here now. Because if as we suggested, if you just met with a few representatives from the Interchurch Bureau, that could have all been filtered through. I don't think we'd be here today if there'd been proper consultation.
Yeah, I agree. I think the key aspect here is what does the rating exemption give to churches? And we believe, or I believe, that that's been misinterpreted and misunderstood, and the history of how that's been applied has been lost somewhere. And if there had been a consultation, we could have discussed that matter and clarified it before we move to the next step of, if it isn't covered by the exemption, how should it be rated? Because that's a second and completely different discussion.
I had the fortune to have a long conversation this morning with the former Deputy Mayor of Auckland City, David Hay, who wanted to remind me of that partnership, and also particularly for the Puke-Tapapa area, of a lot of the partnerships that take place between the church, the refugee community, and the outreach that takes place for many new citizens to New Zealand. And I know that's not an area you've particularly touched on today, but you might care to comment.
Well, I mean, only in the sense that they're examples of, partnerships and activities that would be going on in different ways in every ward around the city and the Auckland Council's area.
I do know of a church in Mount Roskill that runs the kindergarten, and the last time I checked, all the children going to that kindergarten run by the church were from Hindu and Muslim families.
Yes. Thank you.
I do think some form of biannual consultation on all kinds of matters would be good.
Yeah, sure.
Because the community is changing very rapidly. We're all looking at what our communities might be looking like in 20 years. And we'd love to know what your strategy is, and we would like to be part of it. So it doesn't need to be more than a few hours, but the people who represent the churches would be glad to share their plans and to hear what you've got in mind, and there might be all kinds of synergies where we need to help each other.
Thank you very much, and thank you for reminding us the importance of volunteerism. I was sitting in this very chamber yesterday with the Hauraki Golf Forum and trying to work out a process for capturing the numbers of hours that are actually invested in to improving the Hauraki Golf, and I think it's about capturing the number of hours in volunteerism in terms of capturing the quality of lives for all Aucklanders. It could be a challenge for you all as churches to come together on.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman, and if I could thank the presenters for your submissions and say, look, there are absolutely lessons to be learned from communication. If you do things the right way, then you understand where we're coming from, we understand where you're coming from, we can have a process of dialogue, and clearly for a number of reasons that didn't happen. So councillors have acknowledged that, and that's why we have intervened in the process. What I wanted to get clear, and Jeff, thank you very much for your submission because you touched on it. Do all of you agree with the principle in para 4 of the officer's report? Because that we need to have the principles very clear. Would you like me to read it out? I'm not sure whether okay. If I read it out to you with your indulgence, Mr Chairman, this is the principles that we ought to follow. Rates must comply with legislation that requires that land solely or principally used for religious worship is non-rateable. Rates paid by religious organisations for land used for other purposes should be fair and comparable to other properties that are being used for the same or similar purposes. I just wanted to know if there was, Jeff, I think you commented on that favourably, but I just needed to know that whether you think that those are the appropriate principles that we should be following in this process.
I'm happy to comment from our perspective that, yes, I would agree with the principle of what's stated. However, we'd want to be careful about the interpretation of the principle in relation to particular
It's always the devil
examples.
in the detail, I accept.
The principle reflects what the law says, and we are not disputing that.
Yeah. Thank you. And,
Yeah,
and everybody's
similarly,
pretty much in agreement?
the same response that the words on a piece of paper make sense. Mm-hmm. It's the interpretation of primarily around the word principally. What does principally mean? We all know what solely means, but what does principally mean?
It's a definition of this part.
Yeah. No, I accept that. The second question, if I may, Mr Chair.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what stood out to me when we were looking at this exercise originally was a church that was earning $1.4 million in income from leasing out its car parks and not paying rates. And that seemed to me inherently to be wrong. And I just wondered whether you agree that where there is a commercial return, whether it be car parks, whether it be commercial childcare being provided, or any other, say a commercial cafeteria, that then comes within the definition not of a religious purpose, but of a commercial purpose that should be rated accordingly.
Well, I think we've all been clear about that principle. I don't think we can state it any more clearly than we have. Maybe what I'd say in response is, it's great if there's been one property that's been discovered that was being wrongly rated that should have been otherwise, absolutely. But it did feel like a little bit like a sledgehammer being used to crack a nut, to come up with that one example perhaps. That is an outstanding example, but you're dealing with hundreds, if not 1,000 or more other properties that kind of suffer the pain of that process along the way. But no, there's no question, and as I've said, our wider regional authorities are very happy to work with council officers to help identify properties and the right rating of them where they are being used for other purposes, and they will have that information and be willing to work with council officers. We don't want to resolve from what we genuinely have to pay.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good process for us to work through, and Diane, you mentioned, and I think John reinforced that if we'd gone through and worked with the Interchurch Bureau, we might have got to the right position. And I think with the proposal in this paper that we defer the rates increase till the next year, that creates the opportunity for proper communication. Thank you very much for that.
Honourable Mayor, just one point. It's just that what is very frightening is that you can interpret that clause to lead to what happened to bring us here today. Yes. So it was the interpretation of that that brought us to this point. So the interpretations can be so wild, there has to be some checks and balances, but your suggestion of meeting will be very good.
Yep, I think you could iron out some of those difficulties. Thank you very much.
May I, just in regards to the Interchurch Bureau, I said please consult with the Interchurch Bureau going forward. I just want to remind you that when you gave us the mitigation letter for the August instalment, the Interchurch Bureau had already been and seen the council, but you still relied on snail mail letters that only got to us 2 days before the deadline. You could have emailed the Interchurch Bureau and have them email out all the parishes. So please use them.
Councillor Lee.
Good morning to you all, and thank you very much for your presentations. The Mayor has noted that this council must comply with legislation, and there are two pieces of legislation at issue here. One is the Local Government Rating Act 2002, and the other one is the Local Government Act of 2002, which empowers this council to levy rates, and these rates increases were included in the long-term plan 2018 to 2028. Under section 83 of the Local Government Act, the council is required to consult using the special consultative procedure, which is a very formal, elevated, special, as the Act says, form of consultation. Can you say that you were consulted with satisfactorily or adequately, in your view, over this rates increase?
No.
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 Non-existent.
She's already said it.
Pretty clear.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, well, thank you very much, Diane, John, Ross, Pauline and Jeff. We have a formal moving recommendation and moved by Councillor Simpson, seconded by myself. So before I put that, just obviously we're going to move straight on to the item, so you're more than welcome to stay.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Well, sorry, we've still got the one more public input and then we're going to move on to the item. So I'm going to put that resolution. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Councillor Walker.
I would just suggest that a formal apology is in order from the council, and I'm happy to move that.
It's
quite clear. Wait for the item. Wait for the item.
No, not going there. Not going there, Councillor. So
I agree.
right, what we're going to do? We're going to do.
The big people.
Ask Peter Robinson, who is the president of the New Zealand Association of Rationalists and Humanists Incorporated. And sorry, I had Robertson and it's Harrison, so sorry, Peter. Incorrect surname there. Welcome.
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
Right, the New Zealand Association of Rationalists and Humanists welcomes this opportunity to present its views to Auckland Council. We note that Schedule 1 of the Local Government Ratings Act 2002, enacted by central government, has placed limits upon the council's discretion at specifying categories of property that are fully non-rateable. The principal exclusion that gives favour to religious organisations is that of land use solely and principally used as places of religious worship. The NZRH research in 2016 concluded that New Zealand's 1.5 million households pay approximately $13.70 per annum to allow places of worship to continue this benefit from their ratings exemption. Collectively, we calculate that this costs approximately $21 million in 2016. The NZRH believes that the Council's review of religious properties has been fair and proportionate within the limits of the existing 2002 legislation. The increase in rates that religious properties might incur is consistent with secular ratepayers. A 2002 research of charity service databases led by the NZRH concluded that the declared wealth of all religious organisations in New Zealand at that time was approximately $11 billion. As religious organisations are exempt from income tax on their commercial investments and they pay passive investments, that $11 billion is likely to now be much greater. In the case of religious organisations making presentations to Council today, we further argue that any rates increase is consistent with other non-religious organisations. We note that the Oraki Baptist Church is present today. According to the current Charities Service database, they receive 3.5 million in total assets, so they have 3.5 million in total assets with $100,000 as current assets. According to the Presbyterian Church website, they have 27 parishes in the Auckland area, and a 2017 report stated that the nationwide income from all Presbyterian churches was 40 million, and that 73% of their assets were in land and buildings. We conclude that any financial strain on increased rates felt by the individual parishes or dioceses of these religious organisations is a matter for them and their central governing bodies. It is not a matter for ratepayers of Auckland through the Council to subsidise these rates increases. The evidence seems to indicate that they can well afford to pay these rates. We conclude to say that the NZRH pays something in the region of $30,000 per annum, and we are not eligible for the exemption for these rates, even though we conduct similar kinds of social services. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Right, do we have any questions of Peter? Yeah, sorry, Councillor Casey.
Mr. Harrison, tell me about the Rationalists and Humanists. I don't know who you are.
Okay, we were established in 1927. It's essentially, it's had various iterations, but we're essentially free thinkers and rationalists in the sense that we believe that reason and evidence should be used to base our public policy and our social actions. For example, we've stood up against racism and intolerance and sexism. We've obviously one of our principal objectives recently has been opposing religious indoctrination in public schools. So we're involved with ensuring we represent the interests of the non-religious in New Zealand, which we haven't seen the official census yet, but in 2018 we believe it's going to be close to 50%.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, and thank you for your submission. As Council has tried to work its way through this, and we have workshopped and so forth, there was a view put forward by some that called it a rational approach would be to the question that I posed, which was around halls and where Alcoholics Anonymous might meet on a regular basis. Was that not part of Christian outreach? And the view that was offered was, well, what they could do is they could pay the rates and then apply to the local board for a grant to cover the cost of the meeting. So is that something that where there is public outreach of that kind, where there are services being extended to the community, that they should or should not receive grants?
I think the framing is quite. So we deal with there's a general problem with exemptions around religious activity versus social services. So I'm kind of shooting from the hip here in terms of we believe that genuine social services should be tax exempt. So that's both rates exempt and general taxation exempt. So for charities which have genuine social services to the community, and that's on an unbiased universal principle, those kinds of things should enjoy full exemption under the tax and rates. I think the situation where, and this is not consistent with the law, I understand, but we oppose giving religious organisations special exemptions that other secular organisations do not enjoy. In the context of this today, we believe that clearly where religious organisations are running commercial activities, like has already been stated, we completely endorse the concept where organisations which are running for-profit commercial operations should be paying their fair share of rates.
I raised AA because it is a fundamental principle that you believe in a higher power. So we could get into a long and interesting debate on that, but I thank you very much for your answer.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you. I recall that our predecessor, an outstanding, illustrious Auckland Mayor and the first chairman of the Auckland Regional Authority, Dovemeyer Robinson, was a member of your organisation. But I don't think he ever tried to hit the churches with massive rates increases. Would that be right?
Somewhat before my time, I'm afraid.
Good answer.
I think,
Good question.
however, the organisation has for many years, and as far as I'm aware since its inception, believed that secular organisations and religious organisations should be treated the same way without any kind of favour by government. It is essential, it's the foundation stone of a separation between church and state, which does not exist in New Zealand because religious organisations are given favour.
Thank you for that, but you will realise that we have to comply with the legislation, and that is the issue at hand.
I do.
Not just one piece of legislation, but two.
Yeah, we acknowledge that the current legislation does give religious exemptions to the religious organisations.
Right, thank you. So, councillors, if you actually just Google the New Zealand Association of Rationalists and Humourists, you'll pretty well see the three main principles that they adhere to on the home page. So do that. So there are no further questions that I see. So I will move this, and seconded by the Deputy Mayor, to thank Peter for his submission. Thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, we will now move to the, we're just local board input. We are going